The morning I got fired, I was holding a syringe full of ketamine and trying to talk a terrified Rottweiler off a metal exam table. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. It was Marcus, my boyfriend of 4 years and, as of 18 months ago, my business partner. The text said, "Come to the conference room when you're done. We need to talk. Bring your badge." I remember staring at those words for a solid 10 seconds while the Rottweiler's owner looked at me like I'd just announced the end of the world. And maybe, for the life I'd built, I had. That was a Tuesday in early March. The magnolia trees outside our clinic on Westmore Avenue had just started to bloom, those pale pink blossoms that never last more than a week in Chicago before a late cold snap kills them. I'd always thought that was a little cruel. Beautiful things showing up right before the freeze. I should have recognized the metaphor sooner. Let me back up. 27 years is a long time to build a life, and I want you to understand what it actually looked like from the inside before it came apart. I'm Celeste Drummond. I'm 48 years old, and I've been a veterinarian for 22 of those years. I did my undergrad at Ohio State, graduated from the College of Veterinary Medicine in 2001, spent 6 years working for other people's practices in Cincinnati and Indianapolis before I moved to Chicago for a residency in internal medicine and never left. I love this city in the specific way you only love a place that has genuinely tried to kill you with its winters and failed. I have a 900-square-foot apartment in Wicker Park that I've rented for 11 years, a 2019 Subaru Outback with 74,000 miles on it, a solid 401k that I've been maxing out since I was 32, and a 14-year-old dachshund named Sergeant Pepper, who moves like a very slow submarine and smells faintly of old leather. Sergeant Pepper has been with me through 3 apartments, 2 cities, 1 broken engagement that I don't talk about much, and exactly 27 years of a friendship with a man named Marcus Hale. That's the part people always get confused about when I try to explain this story. Marcus and I weren't married. We weren't even officially together for most of those 27 years. We were something more complicated and, looking back, more dangerous. We were the kind of friends who orbit each other so closely that neither of you notices when the gravity becomes a trap. We met in 1998 at a conference in Columbus. He was finishing an MBA. I was a second-year vet student. We bonded over bad hotel coffee and a shared hatred of the keynote speaker, and by the end of that weekend, we'd exchanged numbers and made vague plans to get dinner sometime that somehow actually happened, then kept happening for years. Marcus was smart, funny, relentlessly ambitious, and, this matters, incredibly good at making you feel like you were the most important person in whatever room he was standing in. When he looked at you, really looked at you, it felt like being chosen. I know how that sounds. I'm 48, and I know how that sounds, and I'm telling you anyway because it's true. For most of those 27 years, Marcus was my best friend who I was quietly in love with, and I was his best friend who he treated like a safety net. We dated other people. We called each other after breakups. We spent holidays together when neither of us had anywhere better to be, which was more often than I'd like to admit. We were, as my friend Odalis once put it, doing the relationship without any of the paperwork. 4 years ago, I was 44, Marcus was 46, something shifted. His last serious relationship had ended badly. My father had just died, and Marcus had driven 8 hours from Chicago to Cincinnati to sit with me at the funeral home while I signed paperwork and held myself together with both hands. Afterward, in the parking lot of a Cracker Barrel where we'd stopped for coffee at 10 p.m., he looked at me across a sticky table and said, "I've been an idiot for 23 years. I said, "About what specifically?" He said, "You, us, the fact that this should have been something a long time ago." I want to be honest. I cried. Not right then. I held it together until I got to the bathroom. But yes, I cried. because I was 44 and grieving my father, and I'd wanted to hear those words for longer than I was comfortable admitting. So we stopped pretending. We became, officially, a couple. And for about a year and a half, it was genuinely good. Then came the business. 18 months ago, Marcus proposed something that seemed, at the time, like the next logical step. He'd been consulting for medical practices for years, helping them optimize operations and expand. He wanted to open a multi-specialty veterinary clinic, high-end, urban, the kind of place with diagnostic imaging and a full surgical suite and board-certified specialists under one roof. He had the business background. I had the medical credentials, the professional reputation, and, this is the part I try not to dwell on, the money. My father had left me $340,000. Not a fortune, but substantial. Marcus had investors lined up, he said, but they needed to see that the medical director had skin in the game. Skin in the game. I can still hear him saying that, sitting across from me at the kitchen table with spreadsheets open on his laptop, looking earnest and excited, and like the person I'd trusted for nearly 3 decades. I put in $180,000. We structured it as a partnership. I was listed as medical director and co-owner, 40% of the business. Marcus held 50%. The remaining 10% went to a silent investor I'd never met named Garrett Foss, who Marcus described as an old contact from his consulting days, who was hands-off, just wants the return. I signed the paperwork in September, 18 months ago. I used a notary Marcus recommended. I did not use my own attorney. I want to say that again, slowly, for everyone in the back. I did not use my own attorney. I trusted 27 years of history, and I signed documents I had reviewed, but not had independently vetted, because somewhere in my brain I had confused, I love this person, with, this person would never hurt me. Those are not the same thing. I know that now. The clinic opened in January. We named it Westmore Animal Medical Center, after the street, which had been my idea. I was proud of it in a way I hadn't felt proud of anything in years. We had 7 staff members, 2 associate vets, a part-time cardiologist, and a diagnostic imaging suite that made me genuinely emotional the first time I walked through it. I worked 60-hour weeks. I built the patient base from scratch, called in every professional favor I'd accumulated over 2 decades, reached out to referring practices, built relationships with the emergency hospitals. By February, we had a wait list. By early March, I had started noticing things I didn't want to notice. The first thing was the payroll discrepancy. Our office manager, a meticulous woman named Priya, who'd worked in veterinary practice administration for 15 years, flagged it to me quietly one morning. She'd noticed that 2 of our vendor payments didn't match the invoices in our system. Small amounts, one for $3,200, one for $1,800, but the bank records showed they'd been paid to an account number that didn't match the vendors on file. "I'm sure it's just a data entry issue," Priya said, in the tone of someone who was not sure of that at all. "Send me the documentation," I said. "I'll look at it." I looked at it. Then I looked at it again. Then I opened the shared accounting software that Marcus and I both had access to and started cross-referencing vendor accounts, and I found 4 more discrepancies going back to the week we opened. Total, across 6 transactions, $14,600. Not catastrophic, not yet, but wrong. Definitively, unmistakably wrong. I told myself there was an explanation. I told myself I would ask Marcus calmly, like an adult, and there would be a reasonable answer. I told myself this for 4 days while I quietly took screenshots of every transaction record I could access and emailed them to my personal account. That was the week before he fired me. I was also, in that same week, slowly realizing something else, something that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with the way Marcus had been behaving since mid-February. Distracted, secretive with his phone in a way that felt new, coming into the clinic later than usual, leaving for investor meetings that he mentioned but never detailed. I hadn't confronted him because I'd been telling myself I was imagining things, that I was stressed, that I was looking for problems because the financial discrepancies had put me in a suspicious mindset. Then Priya mentioned, almost as an aside, that she'd seen a woman she didn't recognize waiting in Marcus's office the previous Thursday. Young, she said, very put together, had walked in like she knew exactly where she was going. "Did she have an appointment?" I asked. Priya looked at me with the careful, practiced neutrality of someone who had worked for other people long enough to know when not to answer a question directly. "She wasn't in the scheduling system," she said. I drove home that night in the kind of quiet that has weight to it. Sergeant Pepper met me at the door in his usual way, slow, determined, his little legs working hard, his long body swaying, and I sat down on the kitchen floor and let him climb into my lap, which took about 45 seconds because he's 14 and everything takes 45 seconds. I held him and looked at the financial screenshots I'd saved on my phone, and I thought about 27 years and $180,000 and a woman who walked into my clinic like she knew exactly where she was going. My phone buzzed, a text from Marcus. "Big news tomorrow. Can you come in early? 8 a.m. I put the phone face down on the kitchen floor. Sergeant Pepper licked my wrist once, decisively, like he was trying to tell me something. I should have listened harder to what that felt like, that specific cold, sinking feeling in my sternum, the one that isn't quite fear and isn't quite grief, but is somehow both at once. I'd felt it before at the Cracker Barrel parking lot, except in reverse. That night, it had felt like something opening. That Tuesday night in March, it felt like something closing. I set my alarm for 7 and went to bed, and I did not sleep, and in the morning I drove to Westmore Animal Medical Center and walked through the door I'd helped build, past the diagnostic suite I'd helped fund, and a woman I had never seen before was standing in the lobby with a cup of coffee and Marcus's smile aimed directly at her like a flashlight. She was maybe 35, dark hair, silk blouse, the kind of composed, expensive-looking calm that takes either money or practice or both. She looked at me when I walked in, and something crossed her face, not guilt exactly, recognition, like she'd been told to expect me. Marcus came out of his office 30 seconds later. He looked at her first, then he looked at me. "Celeste," he said. "Good, you're here. This is Vanessa." He said her name the way you say the name of someone who already matters, and just like that, I knew the financial discrepancies and the mystery woman and the secretive phone behavior and the investor I'd never met all had the same answer. And that answer was standing in my lobby, drinking coffee like she owned the place, which, I was about to find out, she very nearly did. Vanessa. Marcus said her name like it was already furniture in the room, like she'd been there long enough to belong. And I stood in the doorway of my own clinic with my coat still on and my keys still in my hand, and I did the thing I always do when I'm blindsided. I smiled. Professionally, the way you smile at a difficult client when their cat has just scratched you and you're pretending it didn't. "Good morning," I said, and my voice came out completely steady, which I think is the most impressive thing I've ever done. Vanessa extended her hand. Her nails were short and unpainted, which for some reason made her seem more formidable, not less. "Celeste, I've heard a lot about you." "I wish I could say the same," I said, still smiling, and shook her hand. Marcus looked uncomfortable for exactly 1 second. Then his face rearranged itself into something businesslike and slightly apologetic, which I now understand was the expression he'd been practicing. "Can we go to the conference room? The 3 of us." I put my coat on the hook by the front desk, slowly, deliberately, and followed them down the hall. Priya was already at her desk. She looked at me over her monitor with the specific expression of someone who knew something terrible was about to happen and felt genuinely awful about not being able to warn me sooner. I gave her the smallest nod I could manage. I'd seen the signs. I wasn't walking in completely blind. But knowing something bad is coming and sitting down across a conference table from the person delivering it are two entirely different experiences. Marcus sat at the head of the table. Vanessa sat to his left. I sat across from her and folded my hands and waited. "I'm going to be direct," Marcus said. "Please," I said. "Vanessa and I have been talking for several months about restructuring the ownership of Westmore. She has significant capital to invest and a background in veterinary practice management that I think is going to take this clinic to the next level. We've worked out a deal that would bring her in as majority shareholder." He paused. "That means your 40% stake would be bought out." I looked at him. Bought out at what valuation? He named a number. It was $95,000. I had put in $180,000 5 months ago. "That's less than half of what I invested," I said, calmly, remarkably calmly. "The business is still in its early phase," Marcus said. "The valuation reflects current assets and liabilities, not projected." "Marcus," I said his name quietly. "I'm also the medical director. My license, my credentials, and my professional network are why this clinic has a wait list right now. You understand that's not separable from the business valuation." Vanessa spoke for the first time since we'd sat down. "We'd like to offer you a consulting arrangement, transitional, 3 months, to help the incoming medical director get oriented." "Who's the incoming medical director?" A pause. "That's still being finalized." I looked at Marcus. I thought about 27 years. I thought about a parking lot in Cincinnati and a sticky table and the specific expression on his face when he said, "I've been an idiot." I thought about $180,000 and a notary he'd recommended and documents I hadn't had independently vetted. "I see," I said. "Celeste, I need your badge," Marcus said. He didn't say it cruelly. He said it the way you say something you've rehearsed until the feeling is gone. I reached into my coat pocket, unclipped the badge, and set it on the table between us. Then I stood up, and I looked at Vanessa, and I said, "Welcome to Westmore." And I walked out of the conference room and down the hall and through the front door and into the parking lot, where the last of the magnolia blossoms were letting go of their branches and floating down onto the hoods of cars. And I got into my Subaru, and I sat there. I did not cry. I didn't have enough air. I drove home on autopilot, Lake Street to Damon, Damon South, right on Pierce, and I sat in my apartment for approximately 4 minutes before my body decided I needed to be on the bathroom floor. So I was on the bathroom floor. Sergeant Pepper found me eventually, navigating the hallway with his careful old man walk, and pressed his warm flank against my leg and stayed there. I thought, I am 48 years old, and I am on a bathroom floor because I trusted the wrong person. I thought, $180,000. Gone. For what? I thought, Garrett Foss, the silent investor. 10%. The name I'd barely thought about in 5 months because Marcus had told me he was hands-off, and I had believed that too. I got up off the floor, I washed my face, I went to my laptop. The next 4 days were the worst of it. Not because of any single event, no dramatic confrontation, no explosive fight. Marcus texted once to say that the transition paperwork would be sent over by the end of the week, and I didn't respond. Vanessa, I found out through Priya, who texted me that evening with the careful cover of, "Just wanted you to know," had indeed walked back into the clinic that same afternoon and had been given Marcus's office to work from. My parking spot, which had my name on a little placard, had already been reassigned. That was the detail that got me. Not the money, not the betrayal, not even the years. The parking spot with my name on it, gone by Tuesday afternoon. I didn't tell anyone what had happened for 3 days, not O'Dallas, not my colleague Dr. Terrence Webb over at the emergency practice on Halstead, who'd been referring cases to me, not my sister Renata in Phoenix, who would have driven here if I'd asked. I was ashamed in a way that felt physical, a tightness in my chest that didn't fully release when I breathed, a specific reluctance to open my phone because opening my phone meant being in the world, and the world now knew things about me I wasn't ready to discuss. I spent those days doing two things. I went through every document I had: the partnership agreement, the notarized operating agreement, the investment records, every email Marcus and I had exchanged about the business going back 18 months. I printed them out. I organized them by date in a manila folder, then by category in a second folder. I made a spreadsheet of the 6 financial discrepancies Priya had flagged, with dates, amounts, and the mismatched account numbers. And I called the Illinois Secretary of State's Business Division and requested the full public filing record for Westmore Animal Medical Center, LLC. What I found there, I almost missed it. It was buried in the initial formation documents, and I'd seen these papers before, but I'd seen them the way you see something you trust, without really reading it. The registered agent for the LLC was not the attorney Marcus had told me he was using. It was a company called Foss Management Group, LLC. Garrett Foss, the silent investor, the one who was hands-off. I sat with that for a long time. Then I did something I probably should have done 18 months ago. I paid $29.99 for an online business records search and looked up Garrett Foss in Illinois, Indiana, and Wisconsin. Garrett Allen Foss had been named in a civil fraud case in Cook County in 2019. The case had settled out of court. He was also listed as a registered agent or officer in 11 other LLCs formed between 2016 and 2023, 7 of which had been administratively dissolved for failure to file annual reports, meaning they'd been opened and abandoned. I stared at my laptop screen in my kitchen at 11:30 p.m. on a Thursday night, with Sergeant Pepper asleep on the couch and a half-eaten bowl of cereal going soggy next to my keyboard, and I understood, with the particular clarity that only comes from exhaustion, that I had not simply been left by a man I loved. I had been set up. The relationship, the business, the urgency about the investment, the whole architecture of the last 18 months had been built on something I didn't have a name for yet, but that name was coming. I closed the laptop. I sat in the quiet. Outside, someone on the street below was laughing at something, and the sound felt like it was coming from another planet. The next morning, I called Odalis. She answered on the second ring. "I was wondering when you were going to call me," she said. "How did you know something was wrong?" "Because you haven't texted me a picture of Sergeant Pepper in 11 days, she said. "That is the only metric I need." I told her everything. It took 40 minutes. She asked almost no questions, just made sounds at the right moments, the small affirmations of someone who is listening with her whole body. When I finished, there was a pause, and then she said, "Okay, do you have a business attorney?" "No." "I'm going to call my cousin Dre. He's not a business attorney. He does employment law, but he'll know who to refer you to. Don't sign anything Marcus sends you. Don't respond to his texts. Don't go near that clinic." "He fired me from my own clinic," I said. "I know," Odalis said. "That's exactly why you're not going back there until you have a lawyer. Promise me." I promised her. Then she said, "Also, I need you to listen to me. Are you listening?" "Yes." "You are one of the most competent people I have ever known in my life. You built that patient base in 8 weeks. You did that. That's yours. That is in your head and in your hands and in your reputation. And none of those things are in that building. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" I understood. I didn't feel it yet, but I understood. She called back 2 hours later with a name, Patricia Sue, a business litigation attorney in the Loop, who'd handled 3 veterinary practice disputes and had what Odalis described as a reputation for being extremely unpleasant to opposing counsel in the best possible way. I wrote the name down. I made an appointment for the following Monday. That was Friday. I had 2 days. I spent Saturday reorganizing my documents and writing a 12-page timeline of events, every conversation, every text, every discrepancy, every date, in the most precise language I could manage. I wrote it the way I write case notes, factual, specific, no editorializing. I did not write, "He betrayed me." I wrote on February 19th, Marcus Hale stated he was attending an investor meeting. No meeting appeared in the shared business calendar for that date. I did not write, "I can't believe I trusted him." I wrote, "The operating agreement was notarized by Daniel Greco, Notary Public, Illinois. Marcus Hale recommended Greco in September. Greco is listed as a registered agent for Foss Management Group, LLC, in a 2021 filing." That one, I had to stop and breathe through for a moment. The notary Marcus recommended was connected to Garrett Foss. There it was, sitting in plain text in a document I was typing at my own kitchen table, the whole shape of it finally visible. I kept writing. Sunday morning, I was on my second cup of coffee and my fourth revision of the timeline when my phone rang. Unknown number, Chicago area code. I almost didn't answer it. I'd been letting unknown numbers go to voicemail all week because I didn't have the bandwidth for anything unscripted. I answered it. "Is this Dr. Celeste Drummond?" A man's voice, mid-50s maybe, with the unhurried cadence of someone who was used to people waiting for him to finish sentences. "Who's calling?" I said. "My name is Leonard Kavanaugh. I'm the CEO of North Star Veterinary Group." A pause. "I understand you may be looking for a new position." I set down my coffee cup very carefully. North Star Veterinary Group was Marcus's direct competition, the practice he'd spent the last year and a half positioning Westmore against. They had 4 locations in the Chicago metro area, a full oncology suite at their Evanston campus, and a research partnership with Northwestern that Marcus had openly envied in meetings I'd sat through. "How did you get this number?" I asked. "A mutual colleague," he said. "Dr. Terrence Webb speaks very highly of you. He mentioned you might be available." He said it matter-of-factly, without any apparent awareness that he was describing something that should have felt strange, but somehow didn't. Terrence, of course. Terrence, who referred me cases, who'd been watching what I built at Westmore with the attentive interest of someone who understood exactly what it represented. "I'm not sure I'm looking for a position," I said. "Not yet, anyway." "I understand," Leonard Kavanaugh said, and he sounded like he genuinely did. "I'm not calling to make you an offer over the phone. I'm calling because I'd like to have a conversation. Tomorrow, if you're available. My office in Evanston." I looked at my 12-page timeline, spread across my kitchen table in neat stacks. I thought about the appointment with Patricia Sue on Monday. I thought about Garrett Foss and 11 dissolved LLCs, and a notary whose name appeared in the same filing. "What time?" I said. He said 11 a.m. I wrote it down. I spent the rest of Sunday pulling myself together in the particular way that has nothing to do with feeling better and everything to do with deciding to function anyway. I showered. I ironed the charcoal blazer I'd worn to my first interview at the internal medicine residency 12 years ago because it had worked then and I needed something in my corner that had a track record. I fed Sergeant Pepper his evening meal, the prescription renal diet he'd been on for 2 years, and watched him eat it with the focused, deliberate pleasure of an old animal who knows what matters. Then I sat at my kitchen table and did something I probably should have done 4 days earlier. I called my sister Renata. She answered before the second ring. "I've been waiting," she said. "I know. Tell me everything." So I did. Again. The second telling was different from the one I'd given Odalis, less raw, more structured, because by then I'd lived inside the facts long enough to organize them. Renata listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her, and told me she understood the gravity. When I finished, she said, "The notary is the key." "I know. That's the thread. If the notary who witnessed your signature is financially connected to Foss, and Foss is connected to Vanessa, then the whole thing was orchestrated before you signed. That's not a bad business deal, Celeste. That's fraud. That's what I think, too. Patricia Sue is going to love you, Renata said. Walk in there Monday with everything organized the way I know you've organized it, and watch what happens. She was right. She usually is, which is one of the things I've never fully admitted to her face. Leonard Kavanaugh's office was on the 14th floor of a building 2 blocks from the Evanston lakefront, with windows that looked north over the water and made you feel, briefly, like the city was something you could hold. His assistant offered me coffee, which I accepted, and left me in a conference room that smelled faintly of dry erase markers and good carpeting. He came in 3 minutes later, mid-60s, silver hair cut short, the kind of handshake that is firm without performing firmness. He had the unhurried quality I'd noticed on the phone, and up close it read not as arrogance, but as someone who had stopped needing to prove anything somewhere around age 50, and had found it restful. "Dr. Drummond," he said, sitting across from me, "thank you for coming." "Thank you for calling," I said. "I'd still like to know how you got my number." He smiled, just slightly. "Terrence Webb and I have been friends for 15 years. He called me Thursday morning and told me that the most capable veterinary internist in the Chicago metro area had just been pushed out of her own clinic, and that if I didn't call her before someone else did, I was an idiot." He paused. "I try not to be an idiot." I looked at him. "Terrence knows what happened?" "Terrence knows what he observed," Leonard said carefully. "He's been watching Westmore since it opened. He had opinions about the operation before any of this occurred. He also had opinions about you." There was a short silence. Through the windows, Lake Michigan was the flat gray of early March, and a container ship was moving slowly north along the horizon. "I should tell you," I said, "that I have a meeting with a business litigation attorney on Monday. Whatever happened at Westmore isn't fully resolved. I have no idea how long that process will take or what it will look like." "I know," he said. "Terrence mentioned it. I want you to understand that what I'm about to say is completely separate from whatever legal action you may or may not take." He leaned forward slightly. "North Star has been looking for a director of internal medicine for 7 months. We've interviewed 11 candidates. None of them had your combination of clinical credentials and practice-building experience." He named a salary figure. It was 30% higher than what I'd been paying myself at Westmore. I kept my face neutral. What would the role involve? He described it for the next 20 minutes. I asked questions. He answered them without hedging. By the end of the conversation, I understood that he was serious, that the position was real, and that he had done his homework on me in a way that felt respectful rather than invasive. At one point he said, "I want to be transparent with you about something." "Please," I said. "Marcus Hale approached us 14 months ago about a partnership. We declined. Our clinical director at the time had concerns about his financial disclosures, specifically about a consulting fee arrangement that didn't appear to have a clear corresponding service." He said it evenly, watching me. "I'm not telling you this to influence your legal situation. I'm telling you because I think you deserve to know that you were not the first person to find the numbers at Westmore confusing." I put my coffee cup down very carefully on the table. 14 months ago," I said. "November, 2 years ago," he said. "About 7 months before you entered the partnership." I sat with that for a moment. 7 months before I signed, before I put in $180,000, before I used the notary Marcus recommended. 7 months before all of it, someone else had looked at Marcus Hale's numbers and walked away. I thought about 20 Sasson years and a sticky table at a Cracker Barrel and the specific expression on a man's face when he says, "I've been an idiot." "Thank you for telling me that," I said. My voice came out even. "Think about the offer," Leonard said. "Take whatever time you need. The position isn't going anywhere." Patricia Sue was exactly what Odalise had promised, a small, precise woman in her early 50s who wore reading glasses on a chain and had the energy of someone who had seen every variety of human bad behavior and found it professionally invigorating. She read through my organized folders without speaking for 20 minutes while I sat across from her and watched the traffic on Michigan Avenue through her office window. When she finished, she set the folders down and looked at me over her glasses. "The notary connection is your strongest thread," she said. "If Daniel Greco is a registered agent for Foss Management Group and he notarized your signature on the operating agreement, that's a conflict of interest that potentially invalidates the notarization, which means the agreement itself may be challengeable." She picked up the page where I documented the financial discrepancies. "These 6 transactions, did you preserve the original bank records or just screenshots?" "Screenshots from the shared accounting software, plus I emailed them to my personal account with timestamps." "Good. I'm going to need you to request the full bank statements through your rights as a 40% co-owner. They cannot legally deny that to you." She made a note. "The Foss civil fraud case from 2019. Do you have the case number?" I had it. I'd looked it up Friday night. She looked at me over her glasses again with an expression that I recognized because I use it myself when a patient comes in and the owner has actually done their research. "You've done a lot of my preliminary work for me," she said. "I write detailed case notes," I said. "Old habit." "Keep it," she said. "It'll serve you well." Patricia filed a demand letter to Marcus and Westmore Animal Medical Center, LLC, on Wednesday of that week, asserting my rights as a 40% co-owner, demanding full financial disclosure, and putting Marcus on notice that I was challenging the validity of the operating agreement based on the notary conflict. She also sent a separate letter to Garrett Foss at Foss Management Group. Marcus called me the same evening the letter arrived. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message that was 4 minutes long, starting with, "Celeste, I think there's been a misunderstanding," and ending with, "I really hope we can handle this privately." I forwarded the voicemail to Patricia without listening to it a second time. What happened next took 4 months, which is fast for civil litigation and slow for a life. I know because I lived every week of it. In April, Patricia deposed Garrett Foss. I wasn't in the room, but she told me afterward that he'd arrived with his own attorney and had spent 3 hours declining to answer questions about his relationship with Daniel Greco and the structure of the Westmore partnership. His reluctance, she said, was itself informative. In May, the Illinois Secretary of State's office opened an inquiry into Daniel Greco's notary practice based on a complaint Patricia had filed. Greco, it turned out, had notarized documents for 4 other LLCs connected to Foss Management Group. That made our situation less unique and, paradoxically, stronger. Also in May, Priya called me. She'd been keeping careful records of her own since the day I left. Timestamps, emails, printed copies of vendor payment records that she'd quietly filed in a folder she kept at home. She had documentation of 3 additional financial transfers that occurred after I was terminated, totaling $23,400, all routed to the same mismatched account. She offered to provide everything to my attorney. I told her she didn't have to do that. "I know," she said. "I want to." I thanked her in a way that probably wasn't adequate, because some things aren't. In June, Marcus's attorney made a settlement offer. Patricia called to walk me through it. He was offering to return $140,000 of my $180,000 investment and drop the $95,000 buyout demand in exchange for my signature on a non-disclosure agreement and a release of all claims. "What do you want to do?" Patricia asked. "What's our position if we don't settle?" "Stronger than it was 2 months ago," she said. "The notary inquiry is active. Foss's deposition behavior is on record. Priya's documentation covers conduct after your termination, which opens the door to a claim of continued financial misconduct while you were still a co-owner of record." She paused. There's also the question of damages beyond the investment, your lost salary, your lost equity interest in a practice that had a wait list at 2 months old. How much longer if we don't settle? Another 6 to 9 months, probably, maybe more. I sat in my apartment in Wicker Park, in the apartment I'd lived in for 11 years, and I looked at Sergeant Pepper asleep on the couch with his long body curved like a parenthesis around a throw pillow. He was 14 and a half now. His breathing was slower than it used to be. The renal diet was managing his numbers, but I knew what I knew because I am a veterinarian. "Tell them no," I said, "but counter." We countered at full return of the $180,000 investment, plus $85,000 in damages representing 6 months of lost medical director salary, plus $40,000 in legal fees. No NDA. I was not signing a non-disclosure agreement. That part was non-negotiable. They came back at $230,000 total with an NDA. I said no to the NDA again. They came back at $255,000 with a mutual non-disparagement clause that covered both parties and was substantially narrower than an NDA. Patricia explained the difference. I could still discuss the facts of what happened. I just couldn't make public statements designed to damage Marcus's business reputation beyond what the factual record already established. I could live with that. We settled in July. The wire transfer of $255,000 hit my bank account on a Thursday morning. I was at North Star's Evanston campus when it came through. I'd taken Leonard Kavanaugh's offer in April, started in May, and had spent 2 months learning the rhythms of a practice that had been built with the kind of institutional stability that Westmore never had time to develop. I was standing in the hallway outside the oncology suite when my phone buzzed with the bank notification, and I stopped walking and read it twice. A colleague named Dr. Yemi Adeyemi, who ran the oncology department and had already become something like a friend in the particular way that colleagues become friends when they respect each other's work, came out of the suite and nearly walked into me. "You okay?" she said. "Yes," I said.